Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time. And this is our third lesson. First of all, Moadim L'Simcha to everyone. And today we are going to be reviewing Daf 15 through 23. So we have a nice number of dafim that we have to go through. And okay, so we're actually going to learn the entire second chapter in Masechet Beitza. But first, we're going to finish up. We're going to finish up the chapter on Daf 15. So we were in the middle of talking about sending gifts to your hosts on the festival, and we said that you cannot send what's called nailed sandals, right? Sandals that had nails coming out of them. And the Gemara describes a story that we actually did learn already in Masechet Shabbat, that talked about these Jews that were hiding in a cave, and they got scared, and then they ended up trampling one another, and they got hurt because of these sandals with the nails on them, almost like cleats. They had nails sticking out of them, and therefore the sages decreed that you cannot wear these specific types of sandals because it is so dangerous. But you can move them on the festival. The Gemara continues and says that you cannot send these shoes that were not sewn completely, because again, they're not proper shoes, and therefore you cannot send them. But if they're somewhat attached, then you can send them. Again, the idea is that anything that can be used on the festival can be sent as a gift, and anything that is not useful cannot be sent. So too with white shoes. Apparently, they did not wear white shoes in those days. They blackened them, and therefore white shoes were not able to be worn, as opposed to black shoes that can be worn. The Gemara says you can actually send tefillin on the festival because they are worn in general during the week. And what happens if on Friday afternoon, as we know, you do not wear tefillin on Shabbat? The Gemara says that if you're walking on Friday afternoon and you're wearing tefillin, again, to remind us, in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, people wore their tefillin all day. So the Gemara says that if you're wearing your tefillin and it's Friday afternoon and you're almost at your house, but the sun is setting quickly, then you cover your tefillin like on your head, and then you can walk. Home, or you cover it till you get to the closest house, and then you leave it there, as long as it will be guarded throughout the Shabbat. And with that, we finish the first chapter of Masechet Beitza, and now we're moving on to the second chapter. Now, the second chapter is the theme, the topic of the second chapter is what's called Eiruv Tavshilin. We did mention this in Masechet Eruvin. The Eiruv Tavshilin is basically, and we'll see the details in a minute, but it lets you cook from the festival. Let's say if the festival was on a Thursday and Friday, or just Friday, then usually you cannot cook on the festival, which is on Friday, for Shabbat, because you're preparing from one day to the next day. If you make this Eiruv Tavshilin before the festival, then on Friday you can cook and prepare for Shabbat, and eat those leftovers basically on Shabbat. Okay, so the Mishnah on Daf 15 tells us that Beit Shammai, and here we see a lot in this Masechet, the discussions or the disagreements between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel, again, the study hall. So Beit Shammai says that you need 2 dishes for this Eiruv Tavshilin. Beit Hillel says, no, 1 dish is enough. It can even be apparently they would bake like fish with like an egg on top, and that would be considered two foods, even though they were cooked together. And if this Eruv Tavshilin was eaten completely or it was lost on the festival, then you cannot cook on the festival for Shabbat. So the Gemara continues and explains that it says the word zachor, to remember the Shabbat, and therefore you have to remember Shabbat before the festival. So the Eruv Tavshilin is this reminder that you need to make sure that you have food for Shabbat, or it's a reminder for us that you can't cook on the festival for the next day if it was a weekday, but you can if the next day is Shabbat. Um, okay. So here we have a story of Rabbi Eliezer who was teaching on a festival, and people were getting up to leave as he was speaking. And apparently they were getting up because they wanted to go home and eat. And he says various negative things about each group as they leave. And he says that basically the people who are leaving are focusing on the physical things, which is lunch, as opposed to the eternal beauty of the Torah. And here we learn, the Gemara here mentions what's called Simchat Yom Tov. And I think it's so fitting that we're in the middle of Sukkot, where we are focusing on the simcha, on the joy of the festival. This joy of the festival is generally done through eating, and it seems that it's actually a mitzvah, a commandment. The Torah says, "V'samachta bechagecha," you must be happy during the festival. And here apparently he thought it is permissible, but not necessarily obligatory. Some say that you should split your time between eating and learning. Others say, right, and Rabbi Eliezer, thought that you should be completely focused on God and not on you, on the physical side of enjoyment. But here it seems that the people did want to enjoy themselves. The Gemara continues and says that we actually have to borrow money in order to have food on the festival. Again, as we said, v'samachta bechagecha, you have this obligation to enjoy the festival. And if you do so, God will cover all of your debts. And this is really a way to show your joy in the holiday, and God will take care of you. On Daf 16, the Gemara, and we learned it right before Yom Kippur, so it's really very fitting, where the Gemara talks about a person's income for the year is set on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but and therefore you shouldn't spend too much because you have a limited amount of money that you'll be making during the year. But the Gemara says, but don't worry, because you can spend more for Shabbat and Yom Tov, for Shabbat and the festival. Okay, right, and here they talk about how do you prepare for the holiday, right, or for Shabbat, right? So Shammai would eat every day lichvod Shabbat, like every day he saw something better, he would put it away for Shabbat. And Hillel said that every day he would dedicate his food to God, right? He blesses God every day. And here the Gemara continues on Daf 16, talking about the great gift that is the Shabbat. And this is actually, again, something that we learned in Masechet Shabbat as well, that God gave us the gift of Shabbat. And from here we learn that if you give someone a gift, it's important to tell them that you are giving them a gift. It shouldn't be a secret, but they should know. And the Gemara continues and says that all the mitzvot in general, the commandments, were given in public, but Shabbat was given in private. It's a special bond that we have with God, and therefore we have a special reward. That special reward could be what's called the neshama yetera, which is a special soul that we receive on Shabbat, and that is also secret as well. Okay, the Gemara continues and tells us that how is the Eiruv Tavshilin made? So the Gemara says you cannot use bread. Rather, it needs to be something that isn't as common, right? In those days, bread was very common, but it should be something that is a main course, or it's an accompaniment to the bread. And the Gemara here talks about what these things could be. All right. Here, but then the Gemara continues and says even lentils at the bottom of a pot can be the Erev Tavshilin, or even the fat or small fish that were fried, meaning as long as it's something edible, a food item, at least a kazait, it has to be a certain amount, then it counts as the Eruv Tavshilin. The Gemara proceeds to tell us on Daf 16 that you need what's called da'at, meaning you need to be aware, the person who's making it needs to be aware of what they're doing, but if you and you can have other people in mind for your Eruv Tavshilin, but those people do not need to have dat, meaning they don't have to know that you're doing it. And as long as these people are within your city limits, they can rely on this, let's say, communal Eruv Tavshilin, right? So the Gemara says that if someone forgot to make the Eruv Tavshilin, so the sage of the city would have everyone in mind. But if let's say you forgot, and then you forgot again the next year, so then it's negligence, and then that doesn't work. Okay, so the Gemara here says, okay, let's move on to Daf 17. On Daf 17, the Gemara talks about, I have a picture. Okay, the Gemara talks about the prayers, the tefillah that we say on the festival. So Beit Shammai says that on a festival that falls out on Shabbat, so there are 8 blessings in the Shmona Esrei. So if you remember all the way back when we started learning together in Masechet Brachot, we learned about the formula for Shmona Esrei, the silent Amidah. The first 3 blessings and the last 3 blessings are always the same, no matter what. During the week, on Shabbat, on a festival, they are consistent. And then the middle blessing is or the middle blessings are the ones that change. So Beit Shammai says that you add 2 when you have a festival that falls out on Shabbat. This is actually very appropriate for us as it's Thursday night, and this Shabbat will be a festival and a Shabbat. So what do we do when there's a festival and Shabbat? Beit Shammai says we have 2 blessings. Beit Hillel says no, we only add 1 blessing, meaning a total of 7 blessings. And Shabbat and Yom Tov and the festival come together, and you end you start and you end with the theme of Shabbat, and in the middle you have the theme of the festival, and you end with God is the one who sanctified the Shabbat and the Jewish people and the holidays or the time, right? And the idea really is that God sanctifies the Shabbat, but then he sanctifies the people who then sanctify the calendar. And that is actually what we do. What about Shabbat that is Rosh Chodesh, the new month, or Chol HaMoed, which is going to be actually this Shabbat? Again, we see it's only 7 blessings, meaning 1 blessing in the middle. And we say Ya'aleh v'yavo, right? The additional blessing or the additional prayer that's added during the holiday, Ya'aleh v'yavo, discusses when we go up to Jerusalem, to the temple, and we say it on Rosh Chodesh and also during the festival as well. Okay. Okay, the Gemara continues on Daf 17 that we can set the Eiruv Tchumin on 2 days of the festival with a stipulation. Now, Eruv Tchumin is something different. We learned about it in Eruvin. The idea is that on Shabbat you need to stay within your city limits. You can go 2,000 amot outside of those city limits, but not further. The Gemara says that, and we learned in Masechet Eruvin, that if, let's say, you want to go past that, you can set an Eruv, meaning you put some food at that 2,000 marker outside of the city limits, and that buys you another 2,000 amot past that food. So the Gemara says in general you should do it before the festival, but you can also do it with a stipulation on a 2-day festival. Again, those of you who live outside of Israel who just kept 2 days of Sukkot, right? Again, here in Israel, we only keep 1 day of the festival. Outside of Israel, we keep 2 days. The idea is that they were not sure in the calendar which day was really the festival. And the Gemara explains that you can make a stipulation, right? If today is the festival, then tomorrow is not the festival, so then I can walk wherever I want. And if today is really not the festival, so then I can set up my Eiruv on today because it really isn't the festival. So that kind of stipulation does work for an Eiruv Tchumin. Okay, as we mentioned, you can't cook for the next day of let's say again you have 2 days of the festival. You cannot cook from one day to the next. You can only cook for that day. However, if you have leftovers, then that is okay. Let's say you forgot to do your Eiruv Tavshilin, so then you can't cook. And people can't use ingredients to cook for you. But basically, they can use their own ingredients, and then that would be okay. But the Gemara asks, what happens if you cook anyway, right? You didn't listen to the rules, and you cook anyway. The question is, can you eat it or not? So the Gemara says that if you tricked the law and you pretended to have guests, when you didn't really have, and basically you cooked a lot of food, and now you have extra food, so then you're not allowed to eat it on Shabbat. So Beit Shammai says you're not allowed to eat it. Beit Hillel says you are allowed to eat it. Okay. The Gemara now continues and says that what if you cook on Shabbat, right? We know you're not allowed to cook on Shabbat. If you do cook on Shabbat, you cannot eat it. But on the festival, it's different. Again, cooking on Shabbat is biblical in origin. Cooking on the festival is only rabbinic in origin. Okay, as we mentioned, there was a disagreement if you need 2 dishes or only 1 dish. Does it have to be 2 separate dishes, or could it be 2 foods that were cooked together? And the halacha is that really you only need 1 cooked dish for the Eiruv Tavshilin. The next Mishnah on Daf 17 talks about, we've been talking about the festival being on Thursday and Friday. What happens when the festival is on Sunday? So Beit Shammai says that you can immerse everything before Shabbat. Excuse me. Okay, here we're talking about in order to purify all of your utensils, you need to purify them before Shabbat. Beit Hillel says that your utensils you need to purify before Shabbat, but people can immerse in the mikvah on Shabbat. And both agree that you can purify water. And here we're going to learn a new term. The term is called hashaka. Hashaka really means almost like to kiss, like linashek means to kiss. But the idea is to touch one thing to the other. As you can see here on the top picture, the Gemara says that you can take a stone vessel with water in it that is impure, and you can touch just the tip of that water to the pure water, and that will purify all the water in the blessing, in the vessel. You cannot, however, you could see the bottom picture, you cannot take a wooden vessel that, let's say, became impure and say, oh, since I need to purify the water, I will also immerse my impure vessel. And now I kind of killed two birds with one stone by immersing my vessel as well as the water. So Daf 18 asks why. Why can't you immerse the vessel on Shabbat? And we're going to actually see four different reasons given for this. Reason number one is we're concerned lest you carry the vessel on Shabbat in a public domain. Again, you're not allowed to carry things on Shabbat, and therefore we are concerned that that is going to be an issue. The Gemara continues and says that a person a woman who's a nida, right, who has become impure, she can go to the mikvah, to the ritual bath, and if her clothing is also impure, again, nowadays we don't have this concept of impure clothing, only people. But in those days, clothing became impure as well. So the Gemara says that she can actually go into the mikvah with her clothing, as long as the clothing is very loose, and she can immerse with the clothing so that the clothing and her body become pure at the same time. The next concern is lest you squeeze out again, we talked about vessels, and we see here we're talking about bowls and plates, but vessels in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara are also clothing. So we're concerned that if you immerse clothing on Shabbat, so then you might squeeze them, and that would be a problem. The third reason is lest you keep the vessels, right? You kind of during the week say, oh, I'm not going to bring it to the mikveh now because next week is the festival, and I'll just wait and immerse everything at the same time. And then you might either use it improperly or it might get lost, and therefore that is problematic. The last reason would be that it looks like you're fixing the vessel, meaning till now you couldn't use it. You put it into the mikvah, now it becomes useful, and that would be a problem. Whereas a person is not, you're not fixing the person is the same person, and therefore there is no decree for people, but there is for the vessels. Okay, the top of Daf 19 is going to continue talking about these vessels. What if the vessel became impure before the festival? So then you can't immerse it bein hashmashot. Bein hashmashot means twilight, meaning as the sun is setting, because we're not sure if it's day or night. And that would be even during the week, because we need it to be that after the immersion there is sunset. Therefore, you need to do it before sunset. And here the Gemara has a very important concept, which is you need your thought process to be clear in your actions, right? We need to see through your actions what your intention is. And if that's not clear, then it becomes problematic. And here, since we're talking about intentions, the Gemara talks about changing intentions. What happens if you change your intentions? Let's say you immersed your different utensils to be used in the wine press, and now you decide to use it for oil. You can do that on the festival. You can put it back in the mikvah on the festival because it doesn't really need to go into the mikvah, and therefore it would be okay to immerse it. And here again, speaking about changing, we go to Korban Pesach, which we learned in Masechet Pesachim, talking about changing the group of people, your chavura, the group of people that you were going to eat Korban Pesach with. So let's say you want to go to the mikveh again in order to change groups. The Gemara says that that's okay because, again, that is an unnecessary reason to go to the mikveh. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 19, Beit Shammai says that you can, hold on, I have a picture. Actually, I have a chart for you. This is from, sorry, the pictures that I showed beforehand were, as usual, from Daf HaChaim. These charts, the following two charts, are from the Daf Yomi Advancement Forum, and they have actually really great charts. So here the Mishnah tells us that here we're going to talk about different korbanot, sacrifices, that are brought on the festival or not brought on the festival. And here, just to understand the words, right, mutar means permissible and asur means prohibited. And just to explain the sacrifices, shalmei chagiga, the chagiga shlamim sacrifice was a sacrifice that was brought on the festival. And a shlamim means that some of the meat was eaten by the priest, but a lot of the meat was eaten by the person bringing the sacrifice, meaning it was their festival meal. So that's the chagiga. The next korban is called the olat re'iyah, or right, the re'iyah, korban re'iyah, which means when you go to re'iyah means to see or to be seen. When you go to the temple and you are seeing God or you're seeing the temple, you bring a sacrifice which is an olah. Olah is completely burnt on the altar. That is a gift completely to God. And the next two are those two are obligatory sacrifices. The next two sacrifices are what's called a nidarim or nidavot, which are voluntary offerings. You can volunteer to bring a shlamim. Again, shlamim, some of the meat is eaten, or you can volunteer to bring an olah. An olah is completely burnt on the altar. Okay, so now here is the Mishnah. So Beit Shammai say that you can bring the shlamim on the Yom Tov, on the festival, but you cannot do smicha. Smicha is when you lean on the animal. So the Beit Shammai say you cannot do that on the festival because you can eat the meat of the shlamim, but you can't lean on the animal because it's using an animal, which is problematic on the festival. But you cannot bring the olah because you're not eating the meat. Beit Hillel say you can bring a shlamim and an olah, and you can do smicha as well. Okay, so the Gemara discusses what is this machloket, and as we mentioned, when I explained, the machloket is about the shalmei chagiga, again the chagiga, and the re'iyah, the olah that is the re'iyah on the festival, and the nidarim and nidavot. Everyone agrees that you cannot bring them on the festival because they are not obligatory, right? Obligatory sacrifices can be brought, voluntary cannot be brought. Or, says the Gemara, the machloket is about the festival olah and a regular shlamim. All the festival sacrifices are obligatory, and then you should be able to bring them. And from here, the Gemara talks about the Korbantoda. The Korbantoda is a thanks. I would call it a gratitude offering. It was brought when you were grateful to God for saving your life or for numerous things. It was brought with 40 loaves of bread, or we'll say 40 loaves. Some of them were chametz, were leavened bread, and some of them were matzah. And the Gemara says that you cannot bring a todah on Pesach because, as I just said, it is chametz, and you can also you cannot bring it on Shavuot because it is a festival, but you can bring it on Sukkot. Or some say that it's the same law for Pesach and Sukkot. Or you can bring it on Sukkot, but this Todah can't be the Chagiga. So again, what are we talking about? So the Gemara says that we're really talking about the 14th of Nisan, meaning, remember, Erev Pesach, right before Pesach, you can't bring the Todah because you're not going to be able to finish it. And just as an aside, that is why when we say there's part of the daily prayers is what's called Mizmor LeTodah that we say in Shacharit, and the Gemara says, not the Gemara doesn't say, but your Sidur, the prayer book, says that we do not say Mizmor LeTodah on Erev Pesach, again, because just like you couldn't bring the Todah sacrifice on Erev Pesach, we don't say that prayer on Erev Pesach, which is just an aside. We also didn't say it on Erev Yom Kippur because, again, the same idea. You won't be able to finish all 40 loaves that day. Okay, so now the Gemara talks about a concept called Bal Ta'acher. Bal Ta'acher is the idea that if you volunteer to bring a sacrifice, you need to bring it within a certain amount of time. The question is, what is that certain amount of time? And the Gemara says it's basically a three-way machloket, difference of agreement, a difference of opinion, I should say, of what it is, meaning they all agree it's 3 holidays, right? We have 3 holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And the question is, when it says you have 3 holidays, how do we view that? So the Gemara explains that you shouldn't delay bringing sacrifices, and you have 3 holidays, right? 3 festivals in order to bring it. So here the Gemara says that you can do basically 3 out of order, right? So if, let's say, right before Pesach, you vowed to bring a sacrifice, so then you have Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot in order to bring it, right? Meaning you have 3, you count 3 holidays from wherever you are, and that is how long you have. Or the next opinion is it has to be 3 in order, meaning Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. And therefore, as you can see here, number 2, even if you did it after Shavuot or before Shavuot or before Sukkot, you still have a whole year as long as it ends in Sukkot in order to bring your sacrifice. Or even on Yom Tov, meaning you need to bring it, meaning you have 3, and it all goes till Sukkot, meaning it's considered like the end of the year, and it doesn't matter when you vowed to bring the sacrifice, you have till Sukkot in order to bring the sacrifice. Okay, Daf 20 talks about, again, since we're talking about making oaths on what to do, the Gemara talks about if, let's say, somebody who's dying, and we'll see this later on in Masechet Nezikin, in Seder Nezikin, when we talk about laws, somebody who's on their deathbed is taken very seriously in Jewish law. And therefore, if someone who's on their deathbed says, give this person 400 zuz, and then he can marry my daughter, the Gemara says that you give him the money, but he doesn't have to marry the daughter. It's not conditional. But if you say, he can marry my daughter and then give him 400 zuz, then it's conditional. Meaning, if he marries the daughter, he gets the money, and if not, then not. Okay, the Gemara continues and talks about smicha that we mentioned before, which means to lean on the animal. So the Gemara says that the obligatory olah needs smicha, so does the voluntary olah. And Beit Shammai holds that it does not need smicha, meaning Beit Hillel holds that you compare the two. Beit Shammai says we don't compare the two. And interestingly, the Gemara explains that the voluntary sacrifices are much more common than the obligatory sacrifices, because the obligatory sacrifices are once a year, whereas the voluntary ones are throughout the year. Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai both agree that you need smicha for obligatory shlamim. The machloket is when you do smicha. Do you need to do smicha right before you sacrifice the animal, and therefore Beit Hillel lets you do it on the festival? Or maybe you can do it way before, meaning the day before, and that's what Beit Shammai say, do it before, and then and therefore on the festival you do not need to do um, smicha. And from here, there's a very interesting story about Hillel, the elder, Hillel Hazaken, who did smicha on the festival. And he brought his sacrifice to the temple. But the students of Shammai came and they asked what he was doing, and he said, "Oh, no, no, no! I'm just really bringing a shlamim. I'm not bringing the olah, right? So don't worry." And that day they wanted to rule that the law should be like Beit Shammai. But one of the students of Beit Shammai, Baba ben Buta, stopped them all and said that they need to rule like Beit Hillel, and that is actually what they did. And the Gemara talks about preventing arguments by using very curt language, not to necessarily engage in disagreement, rather try to limit our disagreements. Okay, the Gemara brings proof for Beit Hillel and a counter argument for Beit Hillel and then Beit Shammai. That again, as we said, you cannot bring. So sorry. You cannot bring voluntary sacrifices on the festival. Again, as we said, you can bring your chagiga offering all of Sukkot, but after Sukkot you don't bring it. Right. So again, we see that it has a limit amount of time, but there's not only one day that you bring it. You can bring it all 8 days of Sukkot in order to fulfill your obligation for that sacrifice. And here the Gemara talks about doing things for you, right? The verse says that we can do it lachem, for us, meaning, again, cooking food for people is okay on the festival. What about cooking food for God, meaning sacrifices? And Hillel learns one from the other. Just like you can cook food for people, you can also bring sacrifices for God as well. And now the Gemara continues and says, what happens if you slaughtered the voluntary sacrifice on the festival, even though you were not allowed to do it? Let's say you did it anyway. Can you still sprinkle the blood? Do you continue the process or not? And the Gemara says that you can, in order for the priest to be able to eat the meat, or in order to make sure that the fats get burnt on the altar. But you cannot do it on Shabbat. You can on the festival, but not on Shabbat if you had improper intention when you were bringing the sacrifice. And it seems at the top of 21, the Gemara says that we are more strict when we talk about Shabbat than we are on the festival. The top of 21 talks about an animal that is half owned by a Jew and half owned by a non-Jew. Can you slaughter it, again, to eat for yourself on the festival, right? So again, the Gemara says that it's not like a voluntary offering that's seen as half for the person and half for God, which you cannot slaughter on the festival, because really it's not the same, because when the priests eat the meat from the sacrifice, it's really all going to God, and God is sharing with the priests. What about dough? So the Gemara says that dough that's half owned by a Jew and half owned by a non-Jew, you cannot bake the whole thing. Rather, you need to separate it first and then just bake the Jew's dough, right? You can't do this with the meat. You can't only slaughter half the animal, right? Once you slaughter it, that's it. But with the dough, you can separate it. And here again, we're going to learn the concept of being able to cook for Jews on on the festival, but not for non-Jews. Um, right? What about food that is eaten by people and dogs? So then you can bake all of it on the festival because really you can feed your dog food and you eat all the steak by yourself. And the Gemara asks, what about these villagers who were forced to bake for non-Jewish soldiers on the festival? Can they do that? So the Gemara says that if they can give some of the bread or the food to their Jewish children, so then it's okay because you can say, oh, any piece of this food, yes, we're giving it to the non-Jews, but I could give it to my children at any point, and therefore it is okay to cook that food. What about and here the Gemara talks about feeding date seeds to your animals. They're not considered muktzah, right? They're not considered forbidden to touch or move because they can be used as fuel on the festival. Again, you're allowed to burn things on the festival in order to prepare food. On Shabbat, you can carry them on bread, says the Gemara. What about inviting? This was interesting. The Gemara talked about that you can invite a non-Jew to your meal on Shabbat, but not on the festival, lest you add more food and end up cooking more just for this non-Jew on the festival. Remember, again, the idea is that you can only cook for Jews, but not for non-Jews on the festival. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 21, towards the bottom, tells us that Beit Shammai says that you cannot heat up water to wash your feet unless you can drink from it. Again, the idea is that cooking is permissible on the festival, but not heating up water for bathing. Beit Hillel says it's okay, again, because once it's permitted across the board. And the Gemara, Beit Hillel says that you can even make a large fire and warm yourself with it. The Gemara explains that this making the fire is only really according to Beit Hillel and not Beit Shammai. The next Mishnah tells us about Rabban Gamliel, who was stringent like Beit Shammai on three things. One was that you cannot insulate hot water on the festival for Shabbat, again, in preparation for Shabbat. You can't stand up candles on the festival, and you can't bake thick loaves, only thin ones on the festival, because it takes extra effort. And the Gemara is going to explain that in a second. So the Gemara says, why can't you insulate the hot water? It's because you didn't make an Eiruv Tavshilin. The sages, however, said that you can. The Daf 22 tells us that if a person did not do Eiruv Tavshilin, so then you can do something for him, basically the minimum that he would need for Shabbat, meaning you can make him one dish to eat, you can light one candle for him, meaning you can do the minimum in order to get that person through Shabbat. Or maybe he did do Erev Tavshilin, but insulating water is different, and you need to do that before the festival completely. Okay, the Mishnah mentioned this standing up this candelabrum, and the question is, what are we talking about? So the Gemara explains that these are candlesticks that were made with different pieces, and if you stand it up, it looks like you built it, and that would be an issue of building, of boneh, which would be a problem. The Gemara continues and tells us that you cannot add or take away oil from your lamp on Shabbat, again, and you cannot extinguish fire on the festival, but you can cover the light. Again, not to cover in order to extinguish, but rather to like dull the light to make the room darker. And of course, to save someone, you can extinguish on the festival or even on Shabbat. From here, the Gemara talks about people who have a certain illness in their eye, And what about putting on certain medicine, the salve, on the festival? So the Gemara says that you can put it on the festival. If it has no benefit on the festival, so then not, meaning like if it's something that you'll only get benefit in a week from now, so then you cannot put it on the festival. But a non-Jew can put it on the Jew on Shabbat, as long as the Jew doesn't help him put it on. Okay, we talked about not baking these thick loaves. Maybe we're talking about matzah and we're talking about Pesach, or maybe we're talking about, again, maybe it's this thick loaf, and um, sorry about that. And we're concerned that it's going to become a chametz, or no, we're really talking about baking a lot of bread, and it's not about the thickness, rather the quantity, and we don't want you overworked on the festival, right? What's called tircha. We don't want you to do too much on the festival, and it really has nothing to do with chametz. Um, Okay, the next Mishnah talks about three things that Rabban Gamliel was lenient about. The last Mishnah was things that he was stringent about. Now the Gemara talks about things that he was lenient about. One is that you can sweep your dining room, which was called the bedroom. Two is that you can place incense, or you can use incense on the festival. And the third is that you can roast this certain type of meat on Pesach. And the sages say that all of these things are not permitted. The first one, because we're concerned that you are leveling the floor, which is an issue on the festival. The second is because, again, you're burning or extinguishing coals, not for food, but rather for scent. And the third, when we're talking about roasting meat, the issue was that it looked like the sacrifice, the Korban Pesach, and it was too similar, and therefore the sages said you shouldn't do it. The Gemara discusses the second issue about the incense, and it says that maybe we're talking about burning this incense in order to give a certain odor to, or I guess scent to your clothing. But if it's about giving the room a certain scent, then it would be okay. Okay, so then the question is, no, maybe the disagreement is really about the room, but everybody agrees you can't do it to your clothing. And here the Gemara brings up something called mugmar. Mugmar was basically was smoking fruit. Basically, they would have coals and they would lay fruit on these coals, and it would get this certain smoky flavor, and it was like a delicacy. So the Gemara says that you cannot smoke this fruit on the festival because either you're extinguishing the coals, or maybe it is okay because it's a type of cooking. The top of Daf 23 says that if you put it on a hot earthenware, then it's okay. Or no, it's still not okay because again, you're infusing the fruit with this scent. Or again, you also can't do it with clothing, again, because you're infusing it with this scent. And here the Gemara talks about something called molid recha, where you're creating a new scent, versus mosif recha, where you're just adding to a scent. So apparently it seems that adding to the scent would be okay, but creating a new scent would not be okay. However, ktura is okay. The question is, what is this ktura? It seems that we're going back to this idea of smoking the fruit, which is like cooking, and therefore it would be okay. And here again, the Gemara says that you can roast this goat on Pesach, says Rabban Gamliel, because that you realize that it's not like the Korban Pesach. The sages, however, say no, again, because it looks like the Korban Pesach. The next Mishnah talks about Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. There were things that he said were okay, where the sages said were not okay. And here, um, actually, we had this in Masechet Shabbat as well. The Mishnah says that he would let his cow go out with a strap between his horns into the public domain. The sages said that's actually considered a burden he's carrying, and therefore it is not permitted. Number two is combing an animal on the festival, and we're going to see these combs in a minute. But it seems that it's definitely the metal comb would cause the animal to bleed, which is problematic even on the festival. And the third thing is being able to grind pepper on the festival. So here the Gemara explains that the issue is, again, we were talking about drawing blood. So the Gemara says, first of all, what's this story with the cow? We saw this in Masechet Shabbat that really Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah had many cows. So what's this one cow? It was actually his neighbor's cow. And since he didn't tell the neighbor not to do it, it was considered his cow. Like he has like responsibility for it. The Gemara continues talking about combing the animal and talks about these two different types of combs, one being wood and one being metal, and one having like larger teeth and one having smaller teeth, where the smaller one seems to draw or can draw blood. And here we get into an interesting discussion about intention. We learned in Masechet Shabbat, Rabbi Shimon says that davar she'eino mitkaven. So if you do an action and you don't intend certain consequences, then you're not liable for your actions. Where Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you are liable no matter what your intention is. If that is the outcome, then that is the outcome. So here again, with the combs, the question is, you're just combing the wool. You don't intend to wound the animal. Rabbi Shimon would say it's fine. Rabbi Yehuda would say it is not fine. And since we're discussing, we mentioned this a pepper grinder, here is what it looked like. Or at least a rendition of. So the Mishnah says that the pepper grinder can become impure because it has a receptacle, what's called Beit Kibul. We would call it like a bowl. That's the bottom. And it has, it's metal and it has a sieve. And here the Gemara explains that the bottom is the receptacle. The middle is the sieve, right? Because it kind of separates the peppercorn, and the top is metal, and therefore this entire utensil can become impure. The last Mishnah in this chapter talks about a child's wagon that the child can sit on. Because the child can sit on it, it can become impure, and it can be moved on Shabbat, but it cannot be dragged on the dirt, again, lest it make like a ditch, or maybe it can because it only presses down on the dirt. It doesn't dig in the dirt. And again, back to our discussion about the Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Huda. Rabbi Shimon lets you drag things across dirt because you're not intending to create this ditch in the dirt. Rabbi Huda says, no, that would not be okay. And the chapter ends by saying that our Mishnah are two sages, both going according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinions. And with that, we finish the second chapter of Masechet Beitza. And with that, I want to wish everyone a Moadim L'Simcha. Have a wonderful Sukkot and Shabbat Shalom. And we will be meeting. I know that it's been very complicated over the holiday that I keep switching the days, but I didn't want to miss our class. So next week we will also be learning on Thursday night. And then the week after all the holidays are finished, we will go back to our regularly scheduled program of Tuesday evening or wherever you are on Tuesday. So really wishing everyone a wonderful Sukkot and see you next week.